You
Officer?
can't be parked here.
This space is for disabled individuals. Officer,
I have a handicap plate. It's right there on the car.
that doesn't mean anything. I need proof you're actually disabled.
Proof?
Sir, I'm in a
A
wheelchair.
lot of people fake disabilities to use these
Did you
spots.
seriously ask me to prove I'm disabled while I'm sitting?
The security camera mounted above the landmark building's entrance was recording everything. Every word, every gesture, every moment of the impossible confrontation. And Officer George Glover had absolutely no idea that the man sitting in the custom electric wheelchair, calmly organizing his laptop and presentation materials, had testified before the United States Senate on digital accessibility, had engineered accessibility solutions for 3 Fortune 500 companies, and had the ACLU's Disability Rights Project on speed dial. The man wasn't begging. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't trying to de-escalate. He was Ryan Miller, a 38-year-old software engineer who'd spent 15 years navigating a world that constantly questioned his right to exist in public spaces. And now he was about to become the plaintiff in a federal civil rights lawsuit that would expose an 8-year pattern of targeted harassment, cost the city of Chicago $850,000, end George's career in law enforcement forever, and send him to federal prison for 18 months. Before we dive into this absolutely devastating story, I need you to do something. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. Your country, your state, wherever you are. And if you've ever had someone question your disability, your parking, or your right to be somewhere you absolutely belonged, hit that subscribe button. This story gets even more outrageous. You don't want to miss what happens next. Ryan Miller was one of the most accomplished accessibility engineers in the Midwest. He'd graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern University with a degree in computer science, earned his master's from Stanford, then spent 15 years at Next Tech Solutions, rising to senior software engineer. His specialty was digital accessibility, making websites, apps, and technology work for people with disabilities. He'd won the WebAIM Accessibility Innovation Award. He'd been interviewed on NPR. He'd testified before the Senate Commerce Committee on the need for mandatory digital accessibility standards. 15 years earlier, Ryan had been a college athlete at Northwestern. He was a sprinter on the track team training for conference championships. During his junior year, he was driving home for Thanksgiving when a semi-truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and crossed into his lane on I-94. Ryan survived the crash, but his spinal cord was severed at the T6-7 vertebrae. He spent 8 months in rehabilitation at the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, learning to live as a paraplegic. Then he finished his degree, earned his master's, and went back to work with a singular focus: making the digital world accessible for everyone. He drove a specially modified accessible van with a wheelchair ramp that deployed from the side. He used a high-end electric wheelchair with specialized controls for his level of injury. He had a state-issued disabled parking placard that hung from his rearview mirror. He had disabled license plates with the international symbol of access. He had every legal right to park in handicapped spaces. That Tuesday afternoon, September 18th, he had a 2 p.m. meeting with a potential client. A major healthcare system wanted to overhaul their patient portal and needed an accessibility consultant who understood WCAG 2.1 AA compliance standards. Ryan had parked in one of 3 handicap spaces directly in front of the landmark building at 1:40 p.m., giving himself 20 minutes to get inside and set up. His presentation required his laptop, an external monitor, and code samples. He'd arrived on time, deployed his wheelchair ramp, rolled out in his electric wheelchair, and was adjusting his laptop bag on his lap when a Chicago Police Department patrol car pulled up directly behind his van. Officer George Glover was 46 years old with 15 years on the Chicago Police Department. He'd been rotated through 4 different districts in the past 8 years after multiple informal complaints about his conduct. His current assignment was patrol in the 18th District, which included the downtown commercial area. His job included monitoring parking violations. When George saw the accessible van in the handicap space with a black man in a wheelchair beside it, something triggered in his mind. He didn't process the electric wheelchair. He didn't process the deployed ramp. He didn't process the disabled plates. He didn't process the blue placard hanging from the rearview mirror. He saw what he wanted to see. Someone he assumed didn't belong. He pulled up behind the van, activated his lights, got out, and walked over. Ryan was focused on securing his laptop bag when he heard footsteps and saw flashing lights reflected in his van's side mirror. He turned, confused. He was legally parked. His placard was visible. He was clearly in a wheelchair. "Excuse me, sir. You can't park here. This is handicap parking." Ryan looked up from his wheelchair, genuinely confused. He was literally sitting in a $15,000 electric wheelchair. His legs were motionless on the footrests. The wheelchair joystick controls were visible on his right armrest. He gestured toward his rearview mirror. "Officer, I have a handicap placard. It's hanging right there. And I have handicap plates." George barely glanced at the blue placard, clearly visible through the windshield. "I need to see medical documentation proving you're disabled." Ryan stared at him in absolute disbelief. He looked down at his wheelchair, looked at his motionless legs, looked at the deployed ramp, looked back at the officer. "I'm sorry. You need me to prove I'm disabled while I'm sitting in a wheelchair? A lot of people fake disabilities to use these spots. I need documentation. I'm literally sitting in an electric wheelchair. My legs don't move. What part of this looks fake to you?" "Sir, step away from the vehicle so I can verify your placard. Quick question for you watching. Can you believe what you just heard? Type your reaction in the comments." Ryan felt a cold, familiar rage building in his chest. This wasn't the first time, but it was the most brazen. This officer was looking directly at him, in an electric wheelchair with visible paralysis, and demanding proof he was disabled enough to park legally. "Officer, I can't step anywhere. I'm paralyzed from the waist down. That's what the wheelchair means." George's jaw tightened. "Don't be difficult. Move away from the vehicle." "I am moving. On wheels. Because I can't walk." A security guard inside the Landmark building had been watching through the glass doors. His name was Marcus Chin. He was a former Marine who'd worked building security for 9 years. He'd seen Ryan at the building at least twice a month for the past year. Always professional, always on time, always clearly in a wheelchair. When he saw the confrontation escalating, he pushed open the front door and walked outside, his phone already recording. "Officer, that's Mr. Miller. He's a consultant. He has a meeting here at 2 o'clock. He's clearly in a wheelchair." George spun toward Marcus. "Sir, this is a police matter. Step back. I'm just saying he's obviously disabled. He's in a wheelchair. What's the issue here?" "The issue is verifying legitimate handicap parking use. People abuse these spots all the time." Ryan pulled out his phone and started recording. His voice was calm, but ice cold. "Officer, for the record, I'm Ryan Miller. I'm a paraplegic. I'm sitting in an electric wheelchair. I'm legally parked in a designated handicap space with a valid state-issued placard visible in my window and disabled license plates on my vehicle. You're looking at me in a wheelchair and demanding medical documentation to prove I'm disabled. I'm recording this interaction for my protection." George stepped closer, his hand moving toward Ryan's phone. "Turn that camera off. Now. I have a First Amendment right to record a public official performing their duties in public. I'm ordering you to stop recording. And I'm declining that unlawful order." A woman in a business suit had been walking toward the building when she heard raised voices. She stopped. She saw Ryan in his wheelchair, clearly preparing for a meeting. She saw the officer looming over him. She saw the absurdity immediately. "Officer, that man is in a wheelchair. What are you doing?" George's face flushed. "Ma'am, move along. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me when I see someone being harassed. Look at him. He's in a wheelchair. He has a placard. What more do you need?" Another pedestrian stopped. Then another. A small crowd was forming on the sidewalk. All of them seeing the same thing. A black man in an electric wheelchair being confronted by a police officer while trying to get to a business meeting. The absurdity was obvious to everyone except George. Ryan kept his phone steady, recording. "Officer Glover," he said, reading the name tag. "You've demanded I prove my disability despite visible evidence. You've ordered me to step away despite seeing I'm in a wheelchair. You've attempted to prevent me from lawfully recording. This is disability discrimination and a violation of my civil rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act." George reached toward Ryan's phone. "I said turn it off." Ryan pulled the phone back. "Don't touch me or my property." Marcus Chun stepped closer, his own phone recording. "Officer, I've worked here 9 years. I've seen Mr. Miller dozens of times. He's a legitimate consultant. He's clearly disabled. This needs to stop." Ryan Miller was 23 years old when his life changed forever. He was a junior at Northwestern University, a sprinter on the track team with a 3.9 GPA in computer science. He had scholarship offers. He had internship interviews lined up with tech companies in Silicon Valley. He had his whole future mapped out. Then, on a cold November night in 2009, a semi-truck driver fell asleep at the wheel on Interstate 94. The truck crossed the median and hit Ryan's Honda Civic head-on at 65 miles per hour. Ryan survived. His spinal cord did not. The impact severed it at the T6-7 vertebrae. The doctors at Northwestern Memorial Hospital told him he'd never walk again. He spent 8 months at the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, learning to transfer from bed to wheelchair, learning to navigate a world that wasn't designed for him, learning to accept that his body would never work the way it had before. Some patients in rehab fell into depression. Some gave up on their careers. Some retreated from the world. Ryan made a different choice. He finished his degree from his hospital bed, taking classes remotely. He graduated summa cum laude. He got into Stanford's master's program in human-computer interaction. He decided that if the world wasn't accessible, he'd build the tools to change it. 15 years later, Ryan was a senior software engineer at Nextech Solutions, specializing in digital accessibility. He'd created accessibility auditing frameworks used by Fortune 500 companies. He'd testified before the Senate Commerce Committee on the need for mandatory WCAG compliance standards. He'd founded the Accessible Tech Initiative, a nonprofit that provided free accessibility consultations to small businesses and government agencies. He'd been profiled in Wired magazine and interviewed on NPR's All Things Considered. He lived in a beautiful, accessible brownstone in Chicago's Lincoln Park with his partner James, a high school history teacher, and their adopted daughter Sophia, who was 7. On his office wall hung a quote he'd written himself after his first year in the wheelchair. "I don't want sympathy. I want access." That philosophy drove everything he did. He didn't ask the world to feel sorry for him. He demanded the world make room for him. September 18th, 2024, started like any other Tuesday. Ryan woke at 6, helped James get Sophia ready for school, reviewed his presentation notes over coffee, and left the house at 1:15 p.m. The client meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the Landmark Building in downtown Chicago. It was a big opportunity. Northwestern Memorial Healthcare System wanted to completely overhaul their patient portal, and they needed an accessibility consultant who understood both technical compliance and real-world usability. Ryan had spent 3 weeks preparing. He'd audited their current system, documented 47 WCAG violations, and created a comprehensive remediation plan. This meeting could mean a 6-month contract worth $180,000. Chicago traffic was brutal as always. Ryan navigated his accessible van through the loop, mentally rehearsing his talking points. He needed to convince the hospital's IT director that accessibility wasn't just a legal requirement. It was good design that benefited everyone. Larger clickable areas helped everyone, not just people with motor impairments. Clear navigation helped everyone, not just screen reader users. Simple language helped everyone, not just people with cognitive disabilities. He'd learned to frame accessibility as universal design, not special accommodation. He arrived at 1:40 p.m. and immediately saw something miraculous. An open handicap parking space directly in front of the Landmark Building. In downtown Chicago, this was like finding a unicorn. Usually he had to park 2 blocks away and navigate uneven sidewalks. He pulled into the space, relieved. The blue international symbol of access was painted clearly on the asphalt. His state-issued handicap placard hung from his rearview mirror. His license plates displayed the wheelchair symbol. Ryan pressed the button that deployed his side ramp. The hydraulic system lowered the ramp smoothly to the sidewalk. He maneuvered his electric wheelchair onto the ramp, rolled down, and positioned himself beside the van's sliding door. He opened it and reached for his laptop bag, adjusting it carefully on his lap. His presentation materials were organized in his wheelchair storage basket. He glanced at his watch. 1:43 p.m. Perfect timing. Then he heard footsteps behind him, and flashing red and blue lights reflected in his van's side mirror. A voice spoke, "Sir, you can't park there." Ryan turned his wheelchair to face the officer. He was a white man in his mid-40s, slightly overweight with thinning hair, and a name tag that read Glover. Ryan kept his voice calm and professional. "Officer, I have a handicap placard. It's hanging right there in my window." He gestured toward the blue placard, clearly visible through the windshield. Glover barely glanced at it. "I need to see medical documentation proving you're actually disabled." Ryan stared at him. He looked down at his wheelchair, looked at his motionless legs resting on the footrests, looked at the wheelchair controls on his armrest, looked back at the officer. "I'm sitting in a wheelchair." Glover's expression didn't change. Wheelchairs can be borrowed. People fake disabilities to use these spots all the time. Ryan felt something cold settle in his chest. Not this. Not today. Not again. He'd dealt with this before. Strangers questioning him in parking lots, demanding to see his placard up close, asking why he needed a handicap spot when there were people who really need them. But never from a cop. Never this blatant. Officer, I'm paralyzed from the waist down. This is an electric wheelchair. I own it. It's custom fitted to my body. And I have handicap license plates. He gestured toward the rear of his van where the wheelchair symbol was clearly displayed on the Illinois plate. Glover walked to the back of the van, examined the plate, then returned. These plates could be fraudulent. Do you have your registration? Ryan's jaw tightened. His mind was racing. This wasn't a parking check. This was harassment. He reached slowly into his wheelchair side bag and pulled out his phone. Without taking his eyes off Glover, he activated the video camera and positioned it to capture both of them. Officer, I'm recording this interaction for my protection. I'm legally parked in a designated handicap space with valid credentials. You're demanding proof of my disability despite visible evidence. Glover's face flushed. Turn that camera off. Ryan's voice remained steady, but inside he was furious. 15 years of this. 15 years of proving himself. I have a First Amendment right to record public officials in public spaces. I'm not turning it off. Behind Glover, mounted above the building entrance, a security camera recorded everything. Marcus Chun had been watching through the glass doors of the Landmark Building's lobby. He was the head of security, a former Marine who'd done 2 tours in Iraq before transitioning to civilian work. He'd seen Ryan Miller at this building at least twice a month for the past year, always professional, always clearly disabled, always legally parked. When he saw the police lights and the confrontation escalating, he pushed through the doors and walked toward them, his phone already recording. Officer, that's Mr. Miller. He's a consultant. I see this gentleman here twice a month. He's legitimate. Glover spun toward him. Sir, this is a police matter. Step back. Marcus didn't step back. I'm just saying he's clearly in a wheelchair. He has a placard. What's the issue here? Glover's voice rose. The issue is verifying handicap parking compliance. Now step back before I cite you for interference. A woman in surgical scrubs was walking toward the building entrance when she heard the raised voices. Dr. Denise Washington was a pediatric surgeon at Northwestern Memorial. She stopped, assessed the scene. A black man in a wheelchair being confronted by a police officer, and immediately understood what she was witnessing. She pulled out her phone and started recording. Officer, that man is clearly disabled. What are you doing? Glover's face reddened. Ma'am, move along. But Denise didn't move. Neither did Marcus. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. A delivery driver unloading packages across the street stopped and shouted, "Man's in a wheelchair and you're hassling him? Are you serious?" A young woman in business attire held up her phone. An older man in a suit did the same. 6 phones. 6 witnesses. All recording. Ryan remained eerily calm. His voice was steady, almost clinical. "Officer Glover," he said, reading the name tag clearly for the cameras. "Under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, 42 U.S.C. Section 12132, you cannot demand medical documentation to verify disability status in public accommodations. My visible use of a wheelchair and valid state-issued placard constitute sufficient proof. I'm requesting your badge number for filing a formal complaint. Glover stepped closer, his hand moving toward Ryan's phone. I said, turn that camera off. At 1:58 p.m., Sergeant Maria Torres pulled up in her patrol car, responding to Glover's backup request. He'd radioed for assistance with what he'd called an uncooperative subject refusing to comply with parking enforcement. Torres expected a routine situation, maybe someone arguing over a ticket, maybe someone who'd gotten belligerent. What she found was something else entirely. A man in an electric wheelchair sat calmly beside an accessible van, holding up his phone. Around him stood at least 6 people, all with their phones out, all recording. Officer Glover stood in front of the wheelchair, visibly agitated, holding a citation book. The man in the wheelchair was speaking clearly and calmly. You're writing me a citation for illegal parking despite my valid placard, visible wheelchair, and handicap plates. This is discrimination under federal law. Marcus Chun saw Torres and immediately walked toward her. Sarge, you need to shut this down right now. That's Mr. Miller. He's a consultant who works in this building. He's clearly disabled. He's legally parked. Your officer is harassing him for no reason. Torres looked at the wheelchair, the deployed ramp, the placard hanging in the window, the handicap plates, the crowd of witnesses. Her stomach dropped. Officer Glover, step away from the subject. Now. Glover turned, confused. Sarge, he's illegally parked. He refused to provide. Torres cut him off. Step away. That's an order. She approached Ryan, her voice professional but careful. Sir, I'm Sergeant Torres. I'm going to review the body cam footage from this interaction. Can you give me a moment? Ryan kept his phone recording. I'll wait. Torres walked back to her patrol car, pulled up Glover's body cam footage on her mobile data terminal, and watched. Her face went pale. She watched Glover demand proof from a man in a wheelchair. Watched him dismiss the placard. Watched him suggest the wheelchair could be borrowed. Watched him order the man to step away despite visible paralysis. Torres returned to the scene, walked directly to Glover, and took the citation book from his hands. She voided the citation on the spot. Mr. Miller, I apologize. You're legally parked. You're free to go. The words sounded hollow even as she meant them. Ryan's expression didn't change. I want his badge number. I'm filing a formal complaint. Lieutenant Raymond Burke had been with Chicago Police Department Internal Affairs for 12 years. He'd investigated hundreds of complaints: excessive force, racial profiling, misconduct, corruption. When Ryan Miller's complaint landed on his desk 3 days after the incident, Burke expected a straightforward review. Officer questions disabled parking. Sergeant shuts it down. Officer gets a reprimand. Case closed. Then he pulled George Glover's personnel file. What he found made him physically ill. 14 formal complaints in 8 years. Burke sat at his desk and read through them one by one, his anger building with each page. A 73% citation contest rate, meaning 73% of the tickets Glover wrote were challenged in court and dismissed. The department average was 12%. Glover wasn't just bad at his job. He was targeting people who couldn't fight back. 5 complaints specifically involved people with disabilities. In 2018, Glover had questioned a veteran with a prosthetic leg, demanding he prove his amputation was real by removing his prosthetic in public. In 2020, he detained a deaf woman for 20 minutes because she couldn't hear his verbal commands, then cited her for failure to comply. In 2021, he ticketed a man with cerebral palsy for suspicious behavior, while the man was simply waiting for his accessible bus. 11 complaints came from minorities. Black drivers questioned for driving suspiciously in their own neighborhoods. Latino families stopped for loitering outside their own homes. Asian business owners cited for violations that didn't exist. Burke found something else. 3 separate incident reports where Glover's supervisor, Sergeant Dennis Kowalski, had flagged him for mandatory remedial training, bias awareness training, de-escalation training, community relations training. The recommendations were dated 2019, 2021, and 2023. Burke checked the training records. None of the training had ever been completed. Glover had been reassigned to different districts instead, moved around like a problem that could be hidden rather than fixed. The system hadn't just failed. It had enabled Glover for 8 years. Burke closed the file folder, picked up his phone, and called his supervisor. "We need to escalate this to the FBI. We've got a civil rights pattern here, and we've got supervisory negligence that allowed it to continue." Burke spent 2 weeks tracking down the 14 people who'd filed complaints against Glover. Some had moved. Some didn't want to talk. Some were afraid. But 7 agreed to meet with him. Their stories were heartbreaking. Jessica Morales was a 34-year-old special education teacher with fibromyalgia. In March 2020, Glover had stopped her in a grocery store parking lot and demanded she prove her disability. He said, "I didn't look disabled." He said young people fake fibromyalgia to get parking. He made me stand there for 20 minutes while he called to verify my placard. People were staring. I was in so much pain I could barely stand. I just paid the ticket. I didn't have the energy to fight. David Kim was a 28-year-old software developer with autism. In July 2021, Glover had detained him outside a library, demanding behavioral proof of his disability. He said I made too much eye contact to be autistic. He said I was faking to avoid a ticket. He kept asking me questions designed to trip me up. "If you're really autistic, why can you talk?" I had a meltdown right there on the sidewalk. He wrote me up for disorderly conduct. I paid $200 rather than go to court and have to explain my disability to a judge. Retired Army Captain Jerome Williams was a 52-year-old veteran who'd lost his right leg below the knee in Afghanistan. In April 2022, Glover had accused him of faking his prosthetic. He told me to lift my pant leg and prove the prosthetic was real, in a public parking lot. I'm a decorated combat veteran, and this cop is demanding I show him my amputation like I'm some kind of fraud. I showed him. Then I paid the ticket because I didn't want to deal with the VA paperwork for a court case. Each story was a small tragedy. Each person had been humiliated, questioned, treated like a criminal for simply existing with a disability. Each person had paid rather than fight because fighting meant more trauma, more exposure, more exhausting explanations of their bodies to strangers. Until Ryan Miller. Ryan had resources. Ryan had legal knowledge. Ryan had a platform. And Ryan refused to pay. The FBI's Civil Rights Division opened their investigation in November 2024. Special Agent Christina Alvarez reviewed Burke's findings, watched the security footage, read the complaint files, and interviewed the victims. Within 3 weeks, she'd built a federal case. The charge was 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. It carried a maximum sentence of 1 year per count. The FBI identified 3 counts based on the most egregious incidents: Ryan Miller, Jerome Williams, and David Kim. Glover was arrested on December 3rd. His attorney, a public defender named Thomas Brennan, reviewed the evidence and was blunt. "George, you need to take a plea deal. They have you on video. They have multiple victims. They have your personnel file showing a pattern. You'll get maybe 6 months if you plead guilty." Glover refused. He sat in Brennan's office, arms crossed, insisting, "I was just doing my job. I was enforcing parking regulations. If people can't prove they're disabled, that's not my fault." The trial lasted 3 days in federal court. The prosecution played the security footage from the Landmark building. The jury watched Glover demand proof from a man in a wheelchair. They watched him dismiss the placard, question the wheelchair, suggest it could be borrowed. They heard Ryan's calm voice reciting ADA statutes while Glover ordered him to turn off his camera. Then the victims testified. Ryan described 15 years of navigating a world that questioned his right to exist in public spaces. Jerome Williams described lifting his pant leg in a parking lot to prove his amputation was real. David Kim described having a meltdown on a sidewalk while a cop accused him of faking autism. Jessica Morales cried on the stand, describing the humiliation of being told she didn't look disabled enough. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all 3 counts. Judge Patricia Holbrook presided over the sentencing hearing on February 14, 2025. She'd reviewed every complaint, every video, every victim's statement. When she spoke, her voice was cold. "Mr. Glover, you wore a badge that demanded trust. You violated that trust in the cruelest way possible by targeting the vulnerable. 18 months in federal prison." Ryan settled with the city of Chicago for $850,000 in April 2025. His attorney had pushed for more, but Ryan wanted resolution, not prolonged litigation. The city admitted no wrongdoing but agreed to implement sweeping reforms as part of the settlement. Ryan took the money and immediately donated $600,000 to the Accessible Tech Initiative to launch a new division, the Police Accountability Project, dedicated to tracking and documenting disability discrimination in law enforcement nationwide. The Chicago Police Department's reforms were comprehensive. Every officer was now required to complete 40 hours of annual disability rights training, covering the ADA, implicit bias, and de-escalation techniques specific to encounters with people with disabilities. The department implemented automated body cam review. Any footage containing disability-related keywords like wheelchair, disabled, placard, or prove was automatically flagged for supervisory review. Every district created a disability liaison officer position, staffed by officers who received specialized training in disability law and community relations. The most significant change was called the Miller Protocol. Officers questioning handicap parking were required to articulate specific, observable violations beyond mere suspicion. The presence of a wheelchair, cane, walker, or other assistive device created a rebuttable presumption of legitimacy. No officer could demand medical documentation in the field. The protocol was simple. If the placard is valid and displayed, the parking is legal. Period. 10 years later, 23 other cities had adopted versions of the Miller Protocol. Ryan continued his work at Nextech Solutions and the Accessible Tech Initiative, now serving on the board of the National Disability Rights Network. George Glover was released after serving 14 months of his sentence. He worked in warehouse logistics and was permanently prohibited from law enforcement. He never apologized. In September 2034, Ryan spoke at a disability rights conference in Washington, D.C. He stood at the podium. He'd started using forearm crutches for short distances after years of physical therapy, and shared his final reflection. That day I was tired. I was angry. I just wanted to go to my meeting. But I realized I had resources others didn't. A lawyer on speed dial, media contacts, platform. If this could happen to me, what was happening to people without those things? That's why we fight. Not for ourselves alone, but for everyone who comes after.